there is this New Testament idea that associates Jesus with the temple, or as fulfilling what the temple was. This article that I'm going to work through is going to argue that Jesus is more closely associated with the heavenly temple, because there was this Old Testament, as well as other cultures, had this idea that the temple, or a temple, was mirrored in heaven. There was a heavenly temple, or that the temple was like a gateway to the other side, to the heavenly realm. And this article is going to hit a couple of texts in John that really make sense to see Jesus as more closely associated with the heavenly temple. That really works with John's themes. So let's just go ahead and jump into the article. It's written by Joseph Green, and we'll just move further down. By no means am I going to read this verbatim. We're just really going to skip around. I continue the article. So we're just going to pick up here in this section, 1st century temple theology. And he writes, "It is sufficient to point out that the Jerusalem temple was considered not a static house of Yahweh's presence, but a gateway through which Yahweh made himself available to his people. The temple was believed primarily to be a place for mediation between the natural and the supernatural, or the access of glory between the earthly temple and Yahweh's true heavenly dwelling." If you're familiar with ideas like the navel of the earth, the idea that the temple was like the center of creation, the center of the world, things like that, it comes from the same idea. But continuing on, he says, the earthly temple connected to and was a copy of the heavenly temple. And he compares this to Exodus 25:40 and 1 Chronicles 28:19 and Hebrews 8:5. I've been working through Chronicles, so I recognize what this one is. I'm guessing that this one also is one of these tabnet type texts where you have like temple sacred objects and things like that being furnished, made, ordered, but they're being ordered after a pattern, right? That's what the term tabnet means. And so there's this sense in which it's not just pure human innovation. God is guiding it and saying, do this, right? Make it this way. And then because of that, it's seen as a copy of this heavenly reality. But moving down, he's going to point out that these ideas are explicitly expressed in Hebrews. But he says, in addition to the ubiquity of the heavenly temple concept, there was a widespread expectation that the heavenly temple would be the new temple of the eschaton. As McKelvey has demonstrated, the fusion of the concept of the heavenly temple and the new temple found its logical outcome in the conviction that the eschatological age, when God dwelt with his people in a new and unprecedented way, would bring his temple with him from heaven. That was a little dense, but what he's getting at is the idea that if there's this heavenly temple, then the temple of the future, the eschatological temple, will be the one from heaven. It'll come down from heaven to earth. And so continuing on, he says how the heavenly temple would come to earth could take various forms. In the course of examining specific temple texts in John's Gospel, it shall be argued that the evangelist presents Jesus as embodying the heavenly temple presence come to earth. Upon Jesus' glorification, an eschatological outpouring, described as rivers of living water, spirit, in John 7:37 through 39, expands beyond Israel's borders from the heavenly temple. According to antecedents, the expanding eschatological outpouring was expected to remain connected to a cultic center. So, for example, Ezekiel 47, 1 through 9, Joel 3:18, and Zechariah 14, 8 and 9. Understandably, this cultic center should be nothing less than the true heavenly temple embodied by Jesus. And continuing on is going to point out that this idea, this expectation of a heavenly temple being, the eschatological temple, is found in Revelation, a number of places. But most noteworthy is in chapter 21. It describes the heavenly Jerusalem descending to earth in the eschaton with the caveat, I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb are its temple. Later in the vision, John sees the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. The end of Revelation not only presents the eschatological temple as the heavenly temple, but it also presents Jesus as the heavenly temple and the source of eschatological rivers. And now we'll get into some of the text he brings out. So he begins with the prologue, as you might expect. So he writes, in the fourth gospel's prologue, the Logos, the word, is from the heavenly side of the heaven-earth connection. In addition, the fourth evangelist describes the eternal Logos' arrival on earth using cultic terminology. The prologue provides the first hints that the fourth gospel presents Jesus as embodying the true heavenly temple. So what he's going to pick up on here is the tabernacling language, right? The Logos became flesh and tabernacled among us. And he's going to point out here that it's pretty unique usage. You get this in John and Revelation, basically, at least as a verb, right? Because, as a noun, it would refer to something like a temple or a tabernacle or, a tent. But to say that someone tabernacled, to use that as a verb, is pretty rare, because there is a more common word that you would use if you just meant generic dwelling. And he actually has an interesting footnote here where he says the occurrences here and this is the more generic, dwelling language, in Revelation always refers to earth dwellers, whereas this one, the tabernacle language that John uses in the prologue, is used for saints dwelling in heaven. And he says, to those who hold to common authorship community behind the fourth gospel and the apocalypse, between John and Revelation, this tabernacle language would seem even more likely to carry a heavenly temple nuance in John 1:14. And is also going to bring into the discussion the phrase, we beheld his glory. So that combination of tabernacle and glory language is going to bring to mind texts like Exodus 40:33-38, 2 Chronicles 5:14 through 6:1, and Psalm 77 verses 60 and 61. And he also points out, because you do have a reference to Moses, that we may have an echo of Moses' request to see God's glory. And he writes, like glory, name evokes Yahweh's presence in the tabernacle temple. And again, Exodus 33:18-19, Deuteronomy 12:11, 1 Kings 8, 2 Chronicles 6, and John 17:11-26. The data argue that John does not intend the general sense the Logos dwelt among us with the tabernacle verb choice, right? So he's, in other words, by using this term, he doesn't just mean generically that the word tabernacled among us. His use of this verb in proximity to glory and Moses compels the reader to think of the heavenly tabernacle. He continues, these lexical and conceptual links also are suggestive of the heavenly tabernacle temple, especially when understood in the overall context of the prologue. The prologue functions to place Jesus' ministry within a cosmic framework. Because the Logos is of the heavenly realm, he must become flesh in order to tabernacle among us. The prologue therefore locates the Logos with God, coming to earth to tabernacle so that we can see the glory and in the bosom of the Father. This movement tracks Jesus' location from his pre-existence in heaven down to earth, back up to heaven, after making the heavenly known on earth. The heaven to earth to heaven journey of the Logos contains interesting parallels to the journey of personified wisdom in Jewish literature. And he continues on, whatever the background, the prologue explicitly sets Jesus as pre-existent in heaven. The rest of the gospel describes Jesus tabernacling among his people and his return to heaven. And he continues by setting the Logos in his heavenly context and introducing the Logos as the tabernacling presence on earth. The prologue provides the lexical and conceptual clues that suggest an inbreaking of the heavenly reality with which the tabernacle connected. The heavenly glory presence of Yahweh was manifested on earth in the tabernacle of Moses. The fourth evangelist suggests that something similar, yet greater, has happened, as the Logos became flesh and tabernacled among us, and we beheld his glory. Unlike Moses' tabernacle, the tabernacle of the Logos is not built with human hands, nor is it of earthly origin. The Logos is from the heavenly side of the heaven-earth connection. And that's really interesting because, again, if his thesis holds, Moses' tabernacle was patterned after Christ, right? It's a pattern of Jesus. So 1 John 1:51, this is where Jesus says to Nathanael, you'll see angels ascending and descending, that episode. So he says, if one takes into account the ancient concept of the earthly temple being a gateway to the true heavenly dwelling, John 1:51 becomes significant to the present discussion. This significance is specifically attached not to the tabernacle temple, but to an earlier place of worship, Bethel. When Jesus replies to Nathanael, truly, truly, I say to you, you will see the heavens opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. Almost all commentators agree that this verse contains an allusion to Jacob's vision at Bethel in Genesis 28:12. So this is the story of Jacob's ladder. The first part of the promise in John 1:51, you will see the heavens opened, is similar to introductions for apocalyptic visions, because there are no such visions in the fourth gospel and only one actual sighting of angels. This promise is not for apocalyptic visionary experiences. Rather, the promise touches on one of the metaphysical realities behind apocalyptic vision, the unseen reality of heaven becoming known. As Jacob saw the heavenly reality of an open connection between heaven and earth, the disciples will see the open connection between heaven and earth on the Son of Man. The allusion to Bethel shows that the fourth evangelist does not simply think of Jesus in specifically temple terms. The metaphysical reality behind earthly places of worship extends beyond the tabernacle-temple nexus and includes Bethel. This reality manifested itself in the Son of Man. Moving further down, Jesus, like previous holy places, functions as a gateway between heaven and earth. Unlike previous holy places, Jesus embodies the heavenly side of that gateway. And now John 2:18 through 22. And so this is when, after the temple clearing, I think it's right after that, but this is when the Jews say to him, what sign can you show us for doing this? And Jesus answered them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. So it's that episode that we're dealing with here. Of course, they don't understand what he means by this. They take it very literally. The narrative says, he was referring to the temple of his body or something to that effect. And so moving down, he says, with this aside, again, that parenthetical idea that he's speaking of his body, not the literal temple, the evangelist not only clarifies the referent of Jesus' prior mention of the temple, he intrudes in the narrative to prompt the reader radically to reinterpret the temple in Christological terms. The evangelist elsewhere uses asides to provide interpretive keys to guide the reader into deeper understanding. See John 7:39. The fourth evangelist here ensures the reader understands the reference to the temple as a reference to Jesus' body. So there you have a pretty explicit connection there. In keeping with other Johannine misunderstandings, Jesus' words refer to heavenly truths, but his hearers misunderstand because they only interpret his words at face value. If the other misunderstandings serve as a guide, Jesus' body as a temple reflects a heavenly reality behind an earthly type. And moving down, he says, antecedent expectations for the Messiah to renew the temple and the eschaton probably account for John's emphasis via the interpretive aside. Again, associating Jesus' body with the temple, that kind of thing. The interpretive aside answers questions raised by the clearing of the temple. For example, how could the Messiah bring about the eschatological temple, and what would be the nature of that temple? Jesus raising the new temple upon his resurrection would answer these questions, which is why the evangelist further explains that Jesus' words were only fully recognized post-resurrection. Jesus' act proclaims his identity as the Messiah, the one who would usher in a renewed temple. John makes it clear that this new temple is established in Jesus' risen body. The temple clearing, therefore, provides the setting for Jesus' messianic identity prophetically to be enacted according to expectations. It also provides the evangelist with the opportunity to suggest how the Messiah would establish the new temple. The fourth evangelist places all messianic eschatological hopes in Jesus. And moving down, the introduction of the post-resurrection understanding of the new temple implies a heavenly temple. The expected new cultic center would no longer be located with the Jerusalem structure, but with Jesus' glorified body. The gospel continually emphasizes that Jesus is from above and will return to heavenly glory. If Jesus' resurrected body is the new temple, it is a temple located in heaven. And now he moves down to John 4, 7 through 26, the Samaritan woman at the well. And we'll just continue moving down, and I'll pick up further down in this quote. He says, the fourth evangelist pivots towards issues of worship, using the woman to turn the dialogue from living water to worship. With the hindsight of 7:37 through 39, the move from living water to eschatological worship makes sense. The Messiah's offer of living water prepares for the hour when he will inaugurate a new temple, a new era of worship. The new era of worship is of a heavenly order that renders moot the question which earthly worship center, Jerusalem or Gerizim, is correct. With the passing away of previous worship centers, the remaining portion of Jesus' response to the woman focuses on the nature of true worshipers. True worship is in continuity with Jewish, not Samaritan, salvation history, but the fulfillment of that history has arrived with the Messiah's eschatological hour. Now worship must be done in spirit and truth. And we'll just move down further. John 4, 7 through 26 advances the temple fulfillment theme by clearly stating the passing away of the Jerusalem temple as the center of worship. In the context of Jesus as the source of living water, as well as previous depictions of Jesus as the new Bethel and temple, the evangelist strongly implies that Jesus is the new place of worship instead of Jerusalem, or certainly this mountain. A further implication is that true worship has to take on a spirit or heavenly quality, as the eschatological hour brings a temple and worship of a heavenly order. And now he's going to move to John 7:37 through 39. And he argues here that this is basically the climactic presentation of Jesus as the eschatological temple. The text reads, now on the last great day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried out, saying, if anyone thirsts, let him come to me, and let the one who believes in me drink. Just as Scripture said, from within him will flow rivers of living water. But this he said concerning the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive. For the Spirit was not yet, because Jesus was not yet glorified. In this passage, Jesus is the source of the eschatological streams that spread out from the new temple to bring inner renewal to the new covenant people. These expectations for renewing waters to flow from an eschatological temple throughout the earth were based on previous Jewish sacred texts. We saw these earlier, Ezekiel 47, Joel 3:18, and Zechariah 14:8 and 9. Moving on, while this article will present the passage according to the Western punctuation interpretation, all the widely recognized positions agree that Jesus is associated with the eschatological temple here. In other words, there's a lot of debate on how this should be rendered. But moving down, again, eschatological waters flowing from a renewed temple are described in, again, these passages that we just looked at. According to rabbinic traditions, Zechariah 14 and Ezekiel 47 were connected to the Feast of Tabernacles, the feast where John 7:37 through 39 occurs. Literarily, the setting is prominent. The evangelist breaks into the narrative to re-emphasize the setting as the last great day of the feast. This narrative intrusion reflects a desire to link Jesus' offer of the living water spirit to the feast. Because the evangelist brackets the saying with a final explanatory aside, he also emphasizes the relationship between the Spirit and Jesus' approaching glorification. The structuring suggests Jesus' glorification and pouring out of the Spirit somehow fulfills what the Feast of Tabernacles celebrates. One of the chief ceremonies in the Feast of Tabernacles was the water drawing from the pool of Siloam, followed by a procession to the temple. The water was then symbolically poured out at the altar to recall God's miraculous provision in the wilderness, to ask God to provide rain for the year, and to anticipate God's final abundant provision in the eschaton. The rabbis saw the ceremony as symbolizing the eschatological outpouring, connecting the ceremony with eschatological passages, such as Isaiah 12:3, Ezekiel 47, and Zechariah 13:1. John 7:39 makes the connection between the water and spirit explicit, a connection that was probably already present in the tabernacle ritual. The Feast of Tabernacles therefore provided a setting where the evangelist could re-emphasize Jesus as the eschatological fulfillment of the temple and its festivals. If the living waters flow from Jesus, then the previous Jesus as temple theme naturally leads into Jesus as the eschatological temple and coheres with these eschatological expectations. Jesus fulfills the eschatological temple, and as discussed above, this temple was widely thought to be from heaven because the spirit-living waters flow from him. The evangelist's aside in John 7:39 tightens up previous connections between Jesus as the giver of the Spirit, Jesus as the Messiah, and Jesus as the new place of worship. The aside also ties the realization of these eschatological streams to Jesus' glorification. The streams would not yet flow until Jesus returned to his heavenly glory. At that time, the eschatological water of the Spirit would be given. The efflux of the heavenly temple would flow throughout the earth to those who believed in him. And we'll just kind of summarize with this paragraph. The temple theme progresses from Jesus as the tabernacle, John 1:14, to the new Bethel, 151, to the temple, 221, to Jerusalem and Gerizim being obsolete, 421, and to Jesus as the eschatological temple, from whom flows the promised Spirit rivers. And that's 737 through 39. Of course, the previous references to cultic places implied that Jesus was their eschatological fulfillment, but 737 through 39 brings the eschatological component to the fore. But I think we will leave it off there. Like I said, I don't want to read the entire article. He goes on to point out some other things that beyond just the temple text, you have certain terminology being used, like glory from above, heaven, ascending, descending, sending, that these all emphasize Jesus embodying the heavenly temple. But I just thought that was a very interesting dimension, but it actually does make a lot of sense. Again, my mind's been in this particular topic for a while, dealing with Chronicles, dealing with the temple, and reading some stuff. And of course, I've come across that idea of the temple being like the gateway to the heavenly temple. And I just thought that was an interesting article to look at. But I hope you learned something from that, and I will see you guys later.